Hi, it's time for school. Are you ready? Let's go. My name is Molly. I am a former middle school English teacher, and I'm also a PD provider for teachers. I specialize in mindfulness, SEL, and literacy. In this video, I just want to share with you 4 tips from my book, The Tranquil Teacher Lesson Plan Book, to help you create a real happy place for you and your students this year. Are you ready? Let's look at it together. In order to make a happy place for you and your students, we're going to focus on 4 things that are within your control. Number 1 is our R, relationship building. And I know you've heard this over and over again, that building relationships with your students is really, really important. But we're going to look at some of the ways that you can keep that relationship building while also either maintaining or gaining some of your authority back. When we talk about building relationships with our students, a lot of teachers have made the mistake in the past of trying to become like their students. But when we start acting like our students, we lose some of that authority that we should be maintaining in a classroom. So it's one thing to ask your student about their music, their clothing, their activities. It's another thing to take on some of the trending behaviors of students. Let them explore those trends if it's not disruptive in your classroom, but you don't have to engage in them. Instead, let's focus on a couple of key things that you can practice throughout the school year, whether it's with your students or it's other teachers or with other relationships you have at home. We are going to maintain our adult role and not try to act like a kid. We're going to keep our interactions respectful of students and also showing self-respect, a sense of confidence that you bring to your students, that you are the adult. Building relationships with students is a combination of things that occur organically in your classroom or in your interactions with a student, but also strategically. And that comes down to learning about your students, getting to know their personalities and the things that motivate them or the things that they resist. And lastly, building relationships is a combination of doing things with great intention, but also using our intuition to be flexible, to respond to unexpected events or questions or issues. Those grow as we gain more experience. So you can continue to do your icebreakers, the greetings that you have for your kids at the door, or any other ways that you have been practicing getting to know your kids. But if you start to incorporate some of these habits along with that, you will gain a little bit more authority, at least within yourself. And then over the course of the year, that relationship becomes stronger. Number 2, E is environment. So when you're setting up your classroom, that's the environment. And if there's one thing that teachers have really excelled at in the last several years, it is blinging out their classroom to the nth degree. They're cute little havens, aren't they? And I believe you have spent a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of effort creating these beautiful, engaging, stimulating environments for your students. And I'm not going to tell you to stop doing that, but I'm also going to tell you you don't have to do that. And here's why. If the environment that is most conducive to learning is one that is safe for learning. Now, safety is different for every person. Obviously, we mean physical safety. But this year, I'm going to encourage you to be very observant about anything that might be either inhibiting or limiting that feeling for one student or all of your students. And there are many different ways that we can approach that, but that is the most important. It doesn't matter how pretty the room is. If it's a safe place to learn, if a student can try something and fail and feel encouraged to ask for help or to try again, then that's A+ in my book. Going along with all those beautiful classrooms you guys have created, I'm going to recommend that you kind of take a look at that if that is your classroom, and limit or choose maybe just a couple of sensory specific items at a time. Now, if you are new to a classroom, or you have a very sparse classroom to begin with, you might want to start including something that is sensory specific. So that might mean trimming out some of the extra colors and maybe having just 2 added colors in your classroom. Maybe it's only having one wall that has posters on it and another wall that's relatively bare or that is very academic specific. I think that over the past few years, we've taken all the good ideas and put them all together, and we're kind of putting them all into one child experience. And that might be overwhelming. I know it's overwhelming for me just to be in that. Some kids, it's very overwhelming. And so you're going to know your students and what needs to come in and what needs to be put away or donated if you are like, we don't need this at all anymore. And maybe rotating or balancing the amount of stimulation that's in your classroom. And then think about the purpose of the area you're setting up. And then I'd like you to balance the sensory stimulation that you're including in your classroom, at least one at a time, with a very learning specific purpose that you are creating within your classroom. So all you really have to focus on are 2 different things, right? One sensory stimulating area or influence, and one very learning focused area. So that means either limited stimulation or a very specific type of learning activation, learning reinforcement stimulation. So an example of that would be, I've set up my classroom with the desks and chairs and just what the school has given me, but I've decided to also bring in some wind chimes that are very soft, very subtle, and they're in the back of the room. It'll make a soft little sound. Or I might use that wind chime to get attention from my students. So I have that one sensory thing for now, and we'll see how it works. And then in a corner of the room or in the center of the room or up towards the front of the room or the back of the room, I am designating that as a very focused learning, studying area. So in my classroom, it would be a place where students would go to work on their paper, for example. They needed an extended period of distraction-free time with easy access to some of the tools or resources that they would need for writing a paper or for revising. So it might be a printout, it might be one of the posters that we typically have all over the room. If we're working on writing a 5-paragraph essay or completing a sentence, that's the one and only thing, reminder, visual that I would have at that place, instead of making it part of the decor of my classroom, because then it doesn't really act as a resource. We want to put those resources when they're needed at the place that a child would use them. Okay? So that's E for environment. 3 is A, which stands for activities. And by activities, I'm going to refer to learning activities primarily. We've also continued to create more and more and more activities for students to engage in. And I've noticed this in myself years ago when I started creating lesson activities on a computer. That's how long ago it was, on a computer, because I could easily create the instructions, the directions from my idea. But the amount of time it took me to create the instructions actually was much, much less time than it took my students to complete that project at the time. Now we've kind of flip-flopped that, and teachers are spending an exorbitant amount of time creating slide decks and interactive activities on the computer, or there are entire industries, right, that are creating these activities for our students, and our students go through it in no time, right? They're done in no time, which means it's really not a well-balanced sense of an activity. So here's what I'm going to suggest that you incorporate into your lessons going forward. First, I'm going to ask you to choose fewer learning activities for your students to engage in. And I know that might be a little difficult at times, depending on what skills your students are working on. But the fewer activities you're providing to them, the less clutter in their mind, the less clutter in your mind, the less work both of you are doing on things that don't have to be done, that aren't essential. But more importantly, the more time kids can spend on really going deep into the learning, getting that learning to really be absorbed into their brain, their physical body, because our bodies and our brains work together, as well as being able to articulate, talk about it, their learning. The more often a student can visit or revisit a skill, the stronger that skill becomes. I became an expert at so many books because I spent so much time developing these elaborate learning activities and presentation slides. I became very, very knowledgeable about it. My students, not so much. They didn't spend nearly as much time. So we want to create a little more balance in the classroom when it comes time to learning. And I know this is going to come right up against your pacing guides and your curriculum calendar and things like that. So I'm talking about the activities that you can choose and the things that you have control over in your classroom. One of the ways that will work better for you and your students is by learning or expanding, if you already know, how to differentiate for multiple levels in your classroom. A lot of teachers are pretty good at differentiating down, meaning taking the planned lesson and either simplifying it or creating additional supports, but it's a little bit harder to differentiate up. I talk a lot about differentiation on this channel, so please subscribe and keep coming back as I add more videos on differentiation throughout the year. It's one of my passions about teaching, and honestly, it's the key to your own sanity while keeping very, very high standards for all of your students. And then with those few activities, we're going to extend the time that kids can work on them. And what that means is, obviously, we want to give them time to approach something as we're teaching it to them. But if we can create an activity that is a creation of theirs, right? A product that needs to be built, that needs to be revised, that needs to be developed, then we give kids an opportunity to come back to their work over and over again. And this allows them to go through that whole learning experience that I talked about earlier in terms of how to feel that a place is safe for learning. Ideally, we are scaffolding, so the skills that kids are putting into this one main activity is going to be a repeat of skills they've already developed, and then an attempt at skills that they are learning. And that will just continue to scaffold throughout, say, the unit or the year. Number 4, whoops. Number 4, L for language. So REAL, our L is language. And this is 2 different types of language. One is our verbal language and the other is nonverbal. By doing some very intentional shifts in our language, we can create, again, an environment that is safe and allows for students to be vulnerable, to be questioning, to be taking risks, and things like that. Here's one of the things that I share with teachers in my PD training in order to develop trauma-sensitive instructional language. The 3 messages of trauma are: 1, you're in it alone. Figure it out by yourself. Nobody's here to help you. 2, you're going to be manipulated, lied to, secrets are withheld from you. You can't even trust your own brain. And 3, you are not safe. This is not a good place. You don't want to be here, and we got to leave. Or check out, right? Check out. So in trauma-sensitive instructional language, we don't know what could trigger that response. One thing that I help teachers understand then is how to shift their language so it sounds less manipulative and more inclusive. And that means that we provide choice whenever we can. We also provide an inclusive way of approaching things, that we are doing this together. We're in it together. Now, we can't do this all the time, but as often as possible. And then the safety part comes from helping students get into the present moment, staying in the present moment, feeling included, and feeling like they have choices is going to be how we counteract those messages from some kind of trauma that's going on in their nervous system, not in their thoughts necessarily. And then the nonverbal part of our language is something that is much more difficult for us as teachers. I know I struggled with it a lot. And the first step really is in observing and identifying yourself. And so our nonverbal language is mostly going to come through in your energy, not in how you hold your body or what your hands are doing or what your face is doing, but in your energy. And I know that sounds very woo-woo and abstract, and maybe it is a little bit, but it's accurate. And I know you've had that experience before where you've been near someone who hasn't said a word, but they feel either like or they feel really warm and like inviting. So in other words, that whole like, am I drawn to somebody or am I withdrawing away from them? That's energy. That's what I'm talking about when I say energy. And a lot of our energy over the last several years especially has been very anxiety driven. Does that sound familiar to you? Because I know it was for me. Even when I know that I was working hard with my behaviors, my actions, my smile to be warm and inviting and a good teacher, my energy was so hyped up at times that of course, that it is no surprise that my students over the years became more and more and more difficult to settle down. Now, I'm not saying I was the one and only cause of that. We know there are many factors that influence a person's feelings and energy and all of that. But I'm one of them. And when they're in my classroom, I'm an important one. So focusing on my energy and how I wanted it to feel within me first was a huge step for me. So that's what I'm going to encourage you to maybe just start observing in yourself. that there's a difference between what you're doing and how you are feeling internally, right? Or what kind of energy you are exuding. And then I'm going to go a little bit farther than that, because the other energy shift that I saw in myself from when I started teaching as a young person, young energetic person, to when I stopped teaching as an old lady, right? The shift went from awake and enjoying my classroom to working really hard to entertain my classroom. So the entertainment part, it is a very, very high energy, isn't it? When you're being entertained, nobody's entertained by watching someone sit at a desk and read. Like, that's not entertaining. However, when we all sat at our desk and read, which we would do for 20, 30, 40 minutes at a time, that was very enjoyable. And it was enjoyable for me, and it was enjoyable for most of my students. So the reason it's not as enjoyable now for students is because it's low energy. It's not dull energy. It's just low energy. Okay, subtle energy. So I'm going to ask you to think about, depending on what you're doing, depending on your students, and depending on your own emotional and mental well-being, as well as like balance, like what kind of energy would you like to build in yourself, that you like imagine yourself packaging it up and handing it to your students as they walk in? Because whatever they walk into, they're going to pick up and make more of it, because they're kids, right? They're going to make more of whatever that is. And we can go into a lot more about that in upcoming videos. I go deep, deep, deep into it in one of my training sessions for teachers. Okay, so once again, those 4 things that we're going to focus on to set up the school year, or at the beginning of the school year. 1, relationship building in order to give yourself the adult authority in the room. 2, setting up an environment that feels safe for learning and feels inclusive and focused, regardless of what that focus is, but a focused environment. And then 3, activities that provide at least a balance of effort between teacher and student, and that can be extended for maybe a couple of weeks, a month, even a whole school year, if you have projects like that, and that can then be scaffolded. And finally, incorporating or shifting our language to be more trauma sensitive and helping students feel safe in the classroom so they are more able to learn. Listening to the language of our own body, which is our own energy system, and how it is feeling within our body, and how we can maybe use that to our benefit to create the type of energy we like in a classroom. Those 4 things. If you would like to read a little more about that, I do have the book, Tranquil Teacher Lesson Plan book. It's all about incorporating different types of SEL, social emotional learning, as well as these 4 components into a self-care plan for teachers. I created this book in order to support the health and well-being of teachers and their students. And if you would like to have more conversations about what's happening in your classroom, what's happening in literacy, differentiation, giftedness, mindfulness in your school, or your own teacher self-care, please keep coming back. Hit the notifications bell so that you know when I'm either going to come on live or when I've posted another video. Thank you for taking on the role of being a teacher. Whatever grade level you teach, whatever subject you teach, whatever role you have, your influence in a child's life is so important. See you later.